Hi, this is Chris and Rich from Retro Sanctuary, and today we'll be looking at the VC4000, a second generation console released by Interton in 1978, a console known for being the first to have a self-writing analog stick.
So first I thought I'd better start out by saying that this is a very obscure console, and as such there's actually a lot of misinformation about it online. I've done my best to try to sift through fact from fiction, but there's going to be some speculation in this video. With something this obscure, you never really know what's going to come to light in the future. So basically we're trying to do our best with what we have to work with. So this machine was actually made by Dutch tech giant Philips. At the time they had recently bought two US companies, Magnavox, who had been the creator of the first ever home video game console, the Magnavox Odyssey, and a chip manufacturer called Signetics. Magnavox had a history in the gaming industry and were already well into designing the successor to their original Odyssey, a very capable machine that would become known as the VideoPack G7000 in Europe and the Odyssey 2 in America. Philips unsurprisingly chose to manufacture this console design, which likely left them wondering about what to do with the Signetics chips. Seemingly Philips decided to create a console to show off these chips, and they sort of leased this tech to a variety of different companies, including the German company Interton, who created this particular model. So one of the first things about the misinfo online, many places state that these consoles were first released in 1976, which is completely wrong, and frankly anyone who looks at the games would be able to see that because they're far too advanced for that time. The earliest reports of these machines coming out are from 1978, and this Interton model was actually one of the first ones. Interton had already released a range of Pong consoles in the first generation, as well as a somewhat interesting system called the Interton 2000, a machine which had interchangeable games in the manner of the original Odyssey. So they had a little experience in the market already.
So how well did it do? Well, the machine was not really released outside of Europe, and it seems to have had only limited success outside of Germany. There are no figures available, but judging by German eBay, the console seems to have been a moderate success there at least. In Europe, the Atari 2600 was a little slower to arrive, and as such there was more room in the market for these Philips produced consoles. The launch price, I believe, was around £130 as well, which would have put it below its competitors, so it was reasonable value for money. The system has two controller ports, a hardwired RF out port and a port for the power supply. That's it. The RF out of this system is actually also quite difficult to sync on many CRTs, with later TVs having more problems. The console can however be modded to output composite without too much trouble. The controllers are actually quite interesting. They are fully analog, and unlike many analog controllers at the time, they actually also self-write. As such, this is possibly the first console to come with self-writing analog stick. You can overlay cards onto the keypad section of the controllers. These cards came with some of the games and noted the functions of each of the different buttons. Oddly enough, this design was used in many later consoles of the era.
The hardware is reasonable for the time, and in fact on paper seems better than the 2600, but in practice this is not really the case, as the design is much more rigid here and can't be exploited in the same way that the 2600 ended up being. So generally the results were worse than its two main competitors, the 2600 and the Odyssey 2. Another bit of common misinformation you find online actually is that this console is identical to the Amazon Arcadia and its clones. Whilst these systems are related, they are quite different, with the Arcadia being more like a related but advanced successor.
Okay, Richard, what's your history of the console then?
Well, to be honest, I don't have a lot of history with this machine. I have had it for quite a while, but effectively one day my parents just came back from a boot sale with it. I think this was in the late 90s, and I was like, what the heck is this thing? We had no idea what it was, and it basically went in the loft, you know, so it was pretty much not used. You got to remember that we didn't really have access to the internet at the time, nor eBay or anything like that, so all we had was like one game with it. We didn't know what it was. We didn't really know anything about it, but much later I sort of looked into it more, bought some more games on eBay and such, and that's basically it, you know. So it's not really much of a story. What about you? I mean, even less of a history of it.
I don't have any history. The first time I clapped eyes on it was when we were trying to film this video.
Yeah,
and that's about it. Nothing really interesting to say.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very obscure machine, so I think most people wouldn't really have had any knowledge of it, you know.
So where the games are concerned, unfortunately I have to report that they're basically just knockoffs of early Atari 2600 games. So it's quite surprising actually just how prolific they were with these games, because they've pretty much ported all of the first 4 years of the Atari 2600's library to this system. And even when the Atari's games are like, even when they're ports of arcade games, these versions are based on the ports and not the original arcade machine, so they're sort of like copies of copies in some respects. The packaging for the games is fantastic though. You'll see these things here. Very big cardboard boxes for them. Very nice sort of artwork on the front of them as well, actually.
Yeah.
And
agree.
they sort of open out and have like the instructions in them. So they're very, very nice. I think they're actually one of the nicest things about them. You've got a game in yours, haven't you?
Yeah.
So they sort of slot into the here.
Production values are excellent, really.
Yeah.
You can see the game I'm holding folds out in 3 ways. Has all of the commands and the different games listed on the inside there, so you can get to your game quite easily.
Yeah, these are very well made. They're possibly the nicest thing about the console, actually, to be honest.
Here's the best thing about the console is the actual packaging to the game, which
Yeah.
is kind of sad.
It's a shame that some of these are a bit battered up as well, though. This is actually the game that I got with the system. It's in probably the best condition out of any of the games I've got, and even that sort of got a sellotape on it or whatever. But this one was what I actually got in the late 90s with it, and this was the only game I had. And as I was saying before, they're fairly prolific, the releases on this system. So at least in that area, games kept being released over the time, over the years of its lifespan. They didn't just go into like a drought. So a lot of consoles, a lot of bad consoles can't say that really. A lot of bad consoles only last for a year or two, and then the games dry up. So at least the games did keep coming for this system. And also, as I mentioned before, Philips leased the hardware to a variety of different companies. Unfortunately, the games don't actually work on each other's consoles, though, because they're all different shapes, so they don't fit in there, and even the pinouts are different, so it's not like you can even take the circuit board out of the cartridge and slot it in there and get it to work, which is a bit annoying. But to be honest, a lot of the games on these systems are all identical games, just with different names, so it's not that much of an important thing, really. But there are a few things actually to bring up here, which is that there was at least one converter that was released at the time which allowed this to play the games in the Voltmace database. So if you got one of these converters, it did allow you to play a handful of games that weren't released on the Interton, one of which was actually like a knockoff of Frogger. Not the greatest knockoff of Frogger, but it's sort of like a lot of these games, sort of adequate, really. So not compatible with the other models that are the same thing, but at least with the Voltmace database there is some extra compatibility. I don't know how much that thing costs these days. I think, to be fair, there's probably newer things you can buy that people have put together that just let you play ROMs off of it and such,
Probably, yeah.
like a lot of these systems have nowadays. So what games are you going to pick as your 5 then?
Right, so, okay. We've got, the first one would be Intelligence, which is basically Maze Craze on the 2600. So if you played Maze Craze, you know what I'm talking about, but you've got a maze and you've got to get to the end of the maze, obviously. But with the different versions of the games you go through, it changes the type of game. So you've got walls moving, walls disappearing and reappearing. You've even got a section where there's an AI chasing you, which is a bit...
Yeah, it's not a great AI. It just sort of goes up and down and blocks your way sometimes.
But it can be extremely fun. There was one point where we were playing it and Rich actually got caught in one square and it would not open for him. So it just allowed me to walk through the maze and get there, which was brilliant. It's quite hilarious.
The 2 players sort of like a race to the finish kind of thing.
It's really, really quite good. I really enjoyed that.
Like you say, because of the way the walls change, one player can seem like he's ahead and then he just gets blocked over. Because the whole maze is like constantly warping and changing,
So my second game would be a game called Treasure Hunt, which is basically flag capture on the 2600. So you've got a grid-like minesweeper technically, and you reveal a square, and this square then tells you either what direction the flag is in, how many spaces away you are from the flag, or it will blow you up and send you back to the start, which is infuriating.
I mean, yeah, that one's quite a good sort of logic game, isn't it? I think
Yeah,
two
really
players
enjoyed
trying
that.
to work out the position of the flag faster than each other. Sort of
I
thing.
think as well that could be brought forward into the 21st century. I think that's a great game. I think somebody's missing a trick. They're not making it.
Yeah.
It would be quite fun. Anyway, the third game I want to go with is called Paddle Games, or Video Olympics on the 2600. It's basically a Pong
Yeah.
simulator, isn't it?
It's
really?
like Pong, but there's loads of variations, and I think that they are quite reasonable variations
are,
as well.
they
They
are.
actually do change the games.
So you had Pong, you had Breakout, which was an alright version of Breakout.
Yeah, not amazing.
No.
Serviceable would be what I would say. It's
Yeah.
nice to have it. I mean, it's good that they've just got these extra games on there sometimes.
It's all
anyway.
variety, isn't
yeah,
it?
there's a lot of stuff in paddle games, I think.
Yeah, there is.
So Video Olympics didn't have any Breakout games on it originally on the Atari 2600, so that's sort of an addition anyway.
Yeah. Also had a volleyball-esque game where you're bouncing the ball up and down trying to get away from it. Also, it's all analog, so it's
Yeah.
all, you can move faster, or you can move slower, you can really get to the points you want to get to, which is a really quite a nice addition,
Yeah.
I found. So you had the volleyball, as I mentioned. You had a basketball-esque game where you had a kind of a hoop, but it was really just a line, and you had to bounce it over
That
your
one's
opponent.
really difficult.
It was quite hard, yeah. We were on that for quite a while, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really quite good though. I quite enjoyed it towards the end. Number 4 for me would be Tank Battle or Combat. So
Yeah.
Combat on the 8. It's basically exactly the same as
Yeah.
Combat. The only reason I would take it over Combat on the 2600 is because of the analog stick. And the analog stick allows you to move at an increased or decreased speed,
Yeah.
which is okay in the tanks, but is even better in the jets because
Yeah.
there is a marked increase or decrease in the speed on the
I
jets.
mean, someone can sort of fire at where you are, and you can just sort of speed up, and then it'll miss you and such. So it does add a little bit to the game, doesn't
Adds
it?
a lot to it. Although, speaking up for the 2600 combat, when we were playing jets, we did notice that the jets didn't get hidden by the
Yeah.
clouds, which is a massive letdown because that could have been really good with the analog sticks. Can you imagine going in at
Yeah.
a certain speed and then slowing down, and the opponent thinking, "Whoa, where the hell? Where did you go?
Yeah.
You were going in that speed." They missed a trick there.
So with the Atari 2600 game, the clouds just completely obscure you, so you sort of fly behind them and such. But with this, they're sort of see-through, aren't they? You can
Yeah.
still see the the sprite poking
Yeah.
through kind of thing. So they don't really do anything.
No, so
But
bit of a letdown. So yeah, that was quite a good game
I'm not
as
sure
well.
if I prefer it to Combat, though. I think I do still prefer Combat, even without the analog. I think for a few different reasons, like the wraparounds and things in Combat.
Yes, that's one thing to mention. It doesn't have wraparound.
Yeah.
But that didn't matter to me as much as being able to control my little tank as much as possible.
I'll tell you one other element as well in that game is I think when you shoot someone, it actually resets positions so that you can't just keep shooting them over and over and over. As
That's
well.
true,
That
and
is-
Rich loves that because he likes to spam the shit out of you. He doesn't let you move after he's shot you, so he'd like rack up points. I'm like, well, that's fair, thanks, man. But in the VC4000 copy, it resets you every single time. It moves you back to your starting positions.
Yeah,
So I found that more fair.
I do prefer Combat on the Atari 2600 to this version on here, but I can see why someone might like this one. There's a lot of trade-offs going on, you know.
Definitely. And then my last game on there would be a game called Hunting. Now, this is basically a Space Invaders kind
Yeah,
of game,
it's
isn't it?
sort of
Yeah.
like based on the earlier games, like Air Sea Battle would be one of them.
Yeah.
You know, the enemies don't actually fire at you; they don't move down the screen. It's more just sort of hitting them for points, isn't it?
Yeah, it is 2-player. And on the later levels in the game, you can then move your person,
Yeah.
and you can angle your person to shoot left and right. And there's nothing more infuriating than you lining a shot up perfectly, only for somebody to shoot diagonally and take out the thing that you're trying to take out and get the points
Yeah.
for it. So that is quite a good, fun little break kind of.
We did have some debate over Space Invaders because there is a version of Space Invaders on this console, but it's not the greatest version. I feel like the Space Invaders game probably is a little bit better than that, but it's quite arguable, you know.
Yeah, no, I don't
I'd
think
say.
so.
And that hunting game, actually, the graphics are reasonable for this system as well.
yeah.
Because I think there was an interrupt or two to change the colour of the background and things. So it was one of the nicer looking games on the system, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, Rich, so what are your 5 favourite games?
So my first pick is going to be Monster Man, which is basically a knockoff of Pac-Man. It's somewhat simplified, unfortunately, because there's no dots in there. You have to collect an object that keeps respawning in different areas of the screen. So somewhat disappointing, but it's a version of a fantastic game, so it's a bit more interesting than a lot of the games that were around this time, even though it's not the greatest port of Pac-Man. You really do need to play it on the faster speeds as well, because it's just too slow usually, but put it on the faster speeds, there's some entertainment value there, I would say. The next game is Circus, which is, it's kind of like Breakout, isn't it? And that's based on an arcade game, Circuses, as well. And basically you're sort of on a seesaw and you've got to catch a guy to throw another guy up into the air on this seesaw. So the further you get to the side, the higher it throws the guy up in the air effectively. So it's slightly a variation. But this system doesn't have a particularly great version of Breakout on it, so that's a good one to go with if you want to play that sort of thing, I think. Not really a lot else to say about that, really. No. And you got Invaders. As I said before, I'm going to choose Invaders. Chris obviously chose Hunting. The thing with Invaders obviously is they move down the screen, so there's some level of threat going on there, and they shoot at you as well. But the port of Invaders on here is a bit too slow, isn't it? There's not really much excitement to it. The enemies are very sparsely populating the screen as well. So again, a slightly disappointing version of Space Invaders. There's no 2-player mode on there, but at the same time it's kind of clear that it's a later game because of the way that the enemies attack and things. There's a bit more to it, so there's trade-offs between the games, but it's a shame. But
Hunting's still better.
I feel like I would rather sit and play Space Invaders on my own if I had a choice and I had to play it on my own, like the Invaders game over the Hunting. But if you're playing with 2 people, Hunting is probably better. But yeah, it's kind of disappointing, really, isn't it? Yeah. Invaders. Obviously, it's sort of
that's the way you can describe this console in general. It's kind of disappointing.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of okay, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't want to get too much into the console because we're going to talk about that more later. But yeah, its version of Space Invaders, it's okay, it's adequate, but it's not one of the best ones. Another one we've got though is Super Space, which is kind of like its version of Defender.
Yeah.
And that is actually a little bit more interesting than some of the other games, actually, because so you got the Defender sort of gameplay, but also you have zones in the game, don't you? So it flashes up like this zone is under attack, and you have to fly to that zone, deal with the enemies, then move on to the next zone. You also sort of get your health back by going down into the bases as well, which recharges your health. But it's not as fast or fluid as Defender is. There's I don't think you also pick people up and take them to the ground either. Like you don't rescue people like you do in Defender. So, but like I said, there's elements to this at least that make it a little bit more unique, which is kind of cool.
The 2 players are really good as well, isn't it?
And there's also a 2-player, as Chris was saying, where one player tries to destroy the bases and the other one tries to protect the bases essentially. The last game I'm going to go with is actually just a golf game on the system, and I think for the time it's quite a good golf game. There's a behind the character view, which often wasn't done at the time. And you've got things like wind, so there's clouds that go past showing you which direction the wind's going. You can angle the ball somewhat. And when you get quite close to putting, the sort of setup changes, and it does use the analog stick a bit on like how much power you put onto putting the ball and such, which is it's nice when, because the main thing with this system is the analog stick, isn't it? Yeah. So it's nice when it's used in games because that's something more unique and such.
Definitely. Right, Rich, so what are your final thoughts on the console then?
Well, this it's not one of the greatest machines ever made. It's also not one of the worst, but it's definitely a mediocre system, I would say. There were actually quite a few systems released at this time, and this is probably not even in my top 3 personally. I actually prefer the Odyssey 2 over it by quite a sizable amount, and obviously the Atari 2600 is much, much better. And these are just the consoles that were released in the 1970s, of the age. The later machines, more advanced things like the Intellivision and such are obviously much, much better. But I mean, the system it's quite a robust system. It's quite well made. I would imagine that they last quite well. I've never had any problems with this one. It just feels kind of well made, doesn't it? It did have games on it coming out throughout the whole line, you know, as we mentioned before. So at least you had something to keep getting for your system. It was fairly cheap, cheaper than its competitors. But the problem is, it's just the library is just not very unique. It's all just knockoffs, so there's nothing that really grabs the attention in there, is there? You know?
No, definitely not.
I feel like the most notable thing about it is the analog sticks, and also the box art and such. Like we said, is very nice.
Yeah.
But the analog sticks, they give some of the games a new spin.
They really do. They really
which
help.
is probably the most notable thing about the system. But I mean, overall, like I said, it kind of mediocre, but not the worst out there. What do you reckon then?
Yeah, I've got the same opinion, really. I think they missed a bit of a trick with the analog sticks. I don't think they utilised them enough,
Yeah.
really. And that was its selling point, which was a shame. As you've already said, it is very robust. It's built well. Looks like a bit of a toy, but at least you're not going to have problems with it down the road.
Yeah.
The box art, fantastic. Like, they put a lot of effort into the boxes of the games, which I think that if they'd done the same thing with the games themselves, then maybe they would have had a hit console.
It is a shame that they didn't just do a few more unique ideas. Even if they just put their own spin on a few of these games, you can't really make the most of the analog sticks anyway. If you're just porting digital controlled games, then you're going to be limited on how much you can do with them. So with, like, obviously the paddle games, you know, Video Olympics sort of things, they was originally on using paddles on consoles like the Atari 2600, so those did have analog inputs, so they work reasonably well with the joysticks.
Yeah, and the joysticks are also resetting joysticks as well,
Yeah.
restanding joysticks. Now, on the fly, I was thinking, well, couldn't you have done a game where you pulled the joystick back and then when you let it go, that's how far it shot? Because it's all on a spring, so they could have measured that, surely. I mean, there's got to be people out there who've had these ideas for these games, and they just didn't implement them. They've just thought, well, we'll just copy whatever's out there now. It's probably easier to make a bit of money, which I think is a massive failing on their part.
I would have liked to have seen, I mean, apparently one of the other clones has like a version of Missile Command, and I would kind of like to have seen a version of Missile Command that used the analog stick, because it would be quite fast with it to move the cursor around the screen. I mean, obviously that game was originally like a trackball, so I feel like that could work quite well. But that one wasn't on this particular machine, and I don't think they actually did a very good job of that one anyway. From what I think I have played that.
Yeah, but I am on very middle of the ground though. There are a lot worse than this.
Yeah.
There are a lot better than this. It's like slap bang in the middle of the 70s consoles, I think.
Yeah, I would agree there. It's not something that I would recommend to someone unless they were a collector.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm not really even sure if I would recommend some of the consoles above it. Really, that era is mostly about the Atari 2600.
If they'd utilised those pads a bit better with the 9 buttons, they just missed the goal, didn't they? Really, they had an open goal and they missed it, I reckon.
Yeah, it's sort of disappointing in some respects.
Yeah, slightly disappointing. That's how you can describe this console. Just slightly disappointing. Okay, guys, that's the VC4000 made by Interton for our first ever console look back. We hope you enjoyed the video, guys. Leave us a comment and tell us what you think about the console, and there will be more console look backs in the future. So we'll catch you next time, guys. Take care.
See ya.